Here it is.
Hi, my question is for Matt. On my drive down, I listened to an audio copy of Bart Ehrman's Misquoting Jesus.
Yeah.
And it made me really wonder about how accurate any of the information or any of the words in the Bible that are being currently used are. Do you think it's reasonable for someone to base an entire worldview, religious philosophy on the current Bible because of how different it is from any of its oldest sources?
Now, first things first, before we listen to Dillahunty's response, which is interesting in and of itself, do you hear what this atheist heard? Because remember, I really wish I could find it. But one of the problems with modern day technology is once you've got terabytes of hard drive space, finding something from literally a decade ago that was a short sound file, if you don't have great organization, don't know the date, don't know the name, especially if it's not searchable. I mean, is there such a thing? Is there a program that can search audio files? I don't even know how it would do that. I bet somebody has something like that, but I've never heard of it. Anyway, you can't find this stuff, but I remember on this program, we played it on this program in this studio. I don't think the walls were this color yet. But how long ago was that? That wasn't all that long ago. It's less than 10 years. Yeah, because I'm thinking this is probably right around 10. I don't remember if it was before or after. I think it may have even been before my debate with Bart Ehrman. So it may have been 11, 12 years ago. Anyway, Ehrman was on an atheist webcast. And one of the things that I've faulted Ehrman for is that he, in his populist writings, rather than his scholarly writings, in his populist writings, he leaves the impression that the scriptures have been wildly mangled. When you dig into his scholarly writings, he basically says, we've gotten as far as we can get. We're just tinkering around with a few readings here and there, but the task is pretty much done, and we pretty much know what the New Testament read with a few exceptions. So in Mark 1:41, was Jesus moved with anger or with compassion to heal the leper? And in Hebrews chapter 2, did Jesus die apart from God or by the grace of God? And then you've got the conjectural emendation in 1 Peter, I think it is. Very, when people hear those, they're not impressed. Because the idea that whether Jesus was angry or not in Mark 1:41 changes the message of the Bible is absurd. Jesus was angry in other places in Mark. So the idea of Jesus experiencing anger is not going to change anything. It's really hard to even understand what would apart from God mean in Hebrews chapter 2, given that God the Father is obviously intimately involved in the sacrifice of Christ and the very purpose of the cross and everything else. So what people think when they read his populist books is that there's this huge, all these options, and it's just this total mess. And then when you get into the scholarly work, it's a little thing here and a little thing there, and actually we know what the New Testament was about to begin with. And so this atheist is hearing him talking about a couple of these passages, and they, just like this guy, you heard in his question, well, if the Bible that exists today is so different from what it originally was, well, it's not. So where did he get that idea? He got that idea from Bart Ehrman. And is that purposeful on his part? Bart would say it's not. Oh, no, I know. I said over here, I said over there. Well, I understand what you're saying there. Are you expecting untrained people to have the same care in making conclusions that you are saying needs to be exercised. And so here's this guy. There's the illustration. There's a guy listening to Bart Ehrman. Oh, I keep skipping it. So the atheist, having heard all this stuff on the webcast, asks Bart Ehrman, he says, so, Dr. Ehrman, after hearing all this stuff, tell us, what do you think the New Testament was originally about? What do you think it was really about? And Ehrman's like, it was about Jesus coming as the Lamb of God to die on the cross and give his life for the salvation of the world. I mean, it's sort of like, and the atheist is just so disappointed. He was thinking it might have been like the original plot for Battlestar Galactica or something like that, something really interesting and exciting. But Ehrman's like, no, we pretty much know what the New Testament was about. I mean, my big thing is, do we know with absolute certainty? And it's like the first time I ever understood, I was riding South Mountain. I was listening to Issues, Etc. And Ehrman was on Issues, Etc. And Ehrman, that's when I first came to understand that what Bart Ehrman was saying is if the Bible was inspired, there would be no textual variance. There would be no differences in the manuscripts. And I just about rode off the edge of the mountain because I was just stunned that anyone could have that perspective. And of course, that's what we wanted to debate in 2009. He would not debate it, will not debate it to this day. I think he knows that type of theological assertion would never survive, simply would never, ever survive any meaningful debate. But there's the illustration, and that's what people hear. And you'll probably have people in your family who, at least this guy was listening to Bart Ehrman's book. Let's face it, a lot of the people you're going to be breaking bread with on Christmas Day have only heard what someone who graduated from a junior college where they had a professor who read Ehrman's book and then badly interpreted it to them said. So they don't even get it straight from Ehrman. They get it second, third, fourth hand, and by then it's totally messed up. Totally messed up. So what do you do with that? This is why, one of the reasons, not the only reason, but this is why we have spent so much time over the years on issues relating to textual criticism and the transmission of the text of the Bible and issues like that. But hear how it's interpreted, hear how it is heard by the individual and how that ends up coming out. It's just so different than it once was. It's not even actually what Ehrman is saying. And I don't know what audiobook he was listening. I mean, I'd have to double check this, but I know in the current edition of Misquoting Jesus, there's a Q&A that I don't think was in the original one. It may not be a part of the audio that he listened to, but Ehrman in that says the scribes did the best job that they could, and the variations are relatively minor and do not impact any Christian dogma or teaching. But that was added in later. So the response.
Yeah, so there's one little thing to correct there before I say the no, which I'm going to say, which is that there's not a current Bible. So Ehrman's got some good books, and studying the history of both the canon and trying to determine how reliable the current text is to the original is something that lots of Christian theologians and New Testament scholars, whether they believe or not, have been engaged in. And the truth is that we don't know how close the Bible is to the original. And what's more significant to me is that it doesn't matter if it was 100% accurate to the original, because the question is the original true? Is the current version we get? We have no reason to think that any of them are true, except where they, where they are. When they talk about, you can find all kinds of facts and place names, and if archaeologists dig up New York in the future, that doesn't mean that Spider-Man existed. And so you have to take each individual claim in the Bible separately. And so the idea that someone would base their worldview entirely on what any particular Bible that they got their hands on now says is, to me, absurd. Now, if they can go and investigate and make a demonstration that there's some truth there, and if they can demonstrate a mechanism, even if it was divine revelation, if they could demonstrate that they had this revelation and that this led to truth, then you've got a different issue. But absent that, I don't think anybody should base their life on any book.
Okay, I don't know Matt Dillahunty, but it almost strikes me that he is somewhat aware of the fact that, as Ehrman said in our debate, we have much earlier attestation for the New Testament than for any other work of antiquity, and hence have a significantly higher level of confidence as to its textual transmission than any other work of antiquity at all. So I guess what he was trying to do was move away from the textual critical issue, not offering a correction to what the guy had said, but move away from the textual critical issue toward a more general philosophical assertion of, well, if it's divine revelation, if we shouldn't be trusting any claims of divine revelation to begin with, basically, seems to be what he was attempting to do there. And then, let me see here.
So he's talking about truth again, not belief.
Now the reason all Cy says there is he's talking about truth, not belief, is because prior to this there has been extensive debating back and forth on epistemology. And in fact, if you've not watched this debate, I'd recommend it to you. It's very useful in illustrating what solipsism is and the whole issue of epistemology and things like that. But Cy had prepared so well that he had quotation after quotation after quotation after quotation of Dillahunty on his computer ready to go. So he let Matt make a lot of his points for him as a part of his own presentation. That's very effective, especially when you're dealing with someone who does a regular atheist program. And so you'd have a lot to draw from, but man, it would take you a lot of work to do it. I don't know that I'd have that kind of time. But then Dillahunty read his rebuttal. He said, now normally a rebuttal is meant to be done live, so you're responding to what the other person said. He's exactly right. I'm always more than just a little bit put off when I debate someone who has a pre-written rebuttal, which means what I said was irrelevant, or what I said was going to be so predictable. Well, Dillahunty knew what Cy's presentation was going to be, and so that was one of his points was I was able to write this rebuttal before the presentation. So they both sort of did the same thing to each other at that point, demonstrating a knowledge of the other person's position. But they had gone back and forth on the difference between belief and an assertion of truth. Dillahunty doesn't want to say that what he believes is true. But he really can't respond to almost any question without going beyond the parameters of what he wanted to defend, in essence. So now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this next one, but I want you to hear what this next guy says, because this is something we've covered many, many times.
My question's for Cy.
Yep.
Currently, it's estimated that there's about 350,000 versions of Christianity. So how exactly do you know that your version is the correct one?
This is... Talk about inflation, man. 350,000. 350,000. Now there will not be a correction from Matt Dillahunty on that number, and you can understand why that would be the case. He's really not interested in correcting things like that. But hey, Rich, you remember back in our day there was only 28,000. I mean, okay, some of you watching are going, what are you old men talking about? Back in our day, when we first started debating Catholic Answers, the guys from Catholic Answers, liked to say that there are 28,000 Protestant denominations. And it might have only been 22 initially. But I remember 28 was big for a long time. Then it went to 33 and 35. And now if you listen to them, they're talking 40s. And this guy, 350,000. And I don't remember how many years ago it was. Well over a decade ago now. Probably more than 15 years ago. In fact, it was probably around 2000. So it's been close 20 years ago now. We tore that whole thing apart. We went to the sources that they were using. Demonstrated that basically, every independent church was being identified as an entire denomination, and that the same source had 350 Roman Catholic churches, which obviously they weren't going to buy that. We went through all that stuff. So here you end up with someone who has now taken that number out to 350,000. What?
Okay, folks, all you have to do is go to aomin.org, go to the search engine, and put in the word denominations. And here we have it. 2012, 33,000. Whoops, now 36,000. 2011, Michael Voris, 40,000 denominations. 2010, it's not 33,000, but millions. 2009, 33,000. 2009, 33,000 more.
So we've covered it a few times.
It just keeps going.
Yeah. We've covered it a few times. We certainly have. And so leave it to the atheists to increase it by a factor of 10. 350,000. Well, if you take every single individual as their own denomination, I guess you can come up with millions. But that's really not overly helpful. Not overly helpful at